What's going on, guys? It's Bd0MZ, and I'm bringing you guys a new series that I'm going to be doing. Right now, I'm going to be calling it Chilling with Bd0MZ. May change the name, may not, we'll see. But this is the series that I told you guys that I was going to be doing starting. Well, I didn't say when it was going to start. I mentioned it yesterday in a video I uploaded where I was sitting right here in this tent. This is what it looks like in the daytime, kind of. If I just move this real quick, you can see there's the roof, there's the screen, my yard. So it's a small little tented area, but keeps the bugs out, keeps the rain off you when it's raining for the most part, as long as you stay towards the middle. And yeah, it's just a really nice place to just kind of hang out and relax. So hope you guys enjoy this series. I'm just basically just a rundown of what it's going to be. You guys can suggest topics that I talk about. It might be something like today where I'm talking about something in relation to something I saw. It could just be a rant about something. It's kind of a open forum, kind of whatever. There's really not going to be any script, no planning, just me sitting here talking, sitting in nature, enjoying all the wonders of being with wildlife. So one thing I do want to say is if you hear this really loud buzzing sound, there are hummingbirds in my yard. I uploaded a quick little clip of them a few days ago if you want to check them out. But they've been having a crazy war, so you might hear some buzzing. It almost sounds like a lightsaber or like a really, really, really big bee. It's kind of cool to hear, but I'm sure you'll hear it at some point. So, what I want to talk about today is something that's going to be very controversial, and I know a lot of people have their own opinions on this. I've stayed away from talking about a lot of things just because I didn't want my opinions to anger anyone or make them look at me in a different way. But at the same time, you guys don't really get a chance to find out what I'm like when I'm not streaming. So that's what this series is going to be. It's not really going to be a podcast. It's more just going to be a hangout session, I guess, where I just sit and talk. So if you guys want to learn more about me, this is probably the best place to do it. And yeah, without further ado, this episode, I do want to talk about something, like I said, that's very controversial. It's going to be about drugs. If you guys don't want to hear about this, I totally understand. You can click off. I'm not going to go like, well, you guys will see what I'm going to talk about. But I was watching a podcast of Joe Rogan's. I love watching him. I've been watching him pretty much every day for the last, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 weeks now. I've seen him before. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's not like I'm new to Joe Rogan, but this is kind of the first time I've really like sat down and listened to a lot of what he's done. Usually, I've just listened to like certain guests that I knew, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, or Brian Cox. They're scientists. I'm really big into science, so when I saw that they were on, I decided I wanted to watch. Trying to think who are some of the other ones. Elon Musk was another really good one. And I just started kind of branching out. I started getting I can't even talk. Recommended videos from just like clips of his show, and I started watching those, and then I started watching full podcasts. And I was watching one today. He had on a guy, Johann Hira. It's Hira, I believe, or Harry. It's one of those two. Hari or Hira. I can't remember. I'm going to link it in the description anyways if you guys want to watch the podcast. I do highly recommend it because it does open your eyes to a lot of things, and that's what I like about Joe Rogan. He makes me think, he makes me question, and I think that's good for people, and that's why I wanted to talk about this, because I want you guys to hear about it as well. So Johann is a writer, he's a journalist. He's had friends, people close to him who have had addiction problems, whether it be gambling, drugs, whatever. He's done a lot of research into this. He's gone to multiple countries, talked to people in different countries, whether it's Mexico or Colombia, Sweden, Switzerland, all those places. I've never heard of him before. This is all just stuff that I've gotten from doing research into him a little bit after I watched the podcast, and basically he was talking about the drug epidemic, whether it's heroin or weed, cocaine, and one thing that he kind of hit on that really triggered me and made me want to talk about this is that drug addicts have a problem, and the problem actually is not the drugs. The problem is other things in their lives. And what I mean by this is most people don't become a drug addict just because they can. They become a drug addict because they have a lot of deep pain, or they're trying to hide from something and they start using drugs to try to cope with it. So when we take these people and lock them up in jail, we criticize them, we ridicule them, we scrutinize them, all it's doing is putting them down further and further. So when they get out of jail, they're just going to go right back to doing drugs. He mentioned, I really wish I double checked this. I meant to and I forgot. It's either Sweden or Switzerland. I can't remember. Again, I'm going to link the podcast in the description. You guys can hear all this from his mouth. This is just me after watching it once. I haven't even done any research into what he said. I'm just reacting to what I saw and what I heard. But he was saying that I think it was Sweden. They back in the early 2000s, they had a really strong drug problem, and their solution was to legalize it. It was a heroin problem, and they legalized heroin. But what they did was they opened up medical facilities where people could go. They would use their whatever drug of choice they had. A doctor or a nurse would actually watch them and make sure that they weren't overdosing or anything like that. They were given clean drugs, not street drugs. A lot of you guys probably don't even know much about drugs. A lot of you are young, and I think that's why it's good to hear some of this stuff, because you guys are young. You guys are still forming opinions on things, and you guys are probably getting to an age where you might want to experiment with some stuff. Not necessarily saying you guys are going to go and experiment with heroin or whatever, but you guys might start drinking, or you guys might start doing something else, or whatever it may be. Just realize that there are negatives to it, and there are responsible ways to do things as well. I don't recommend, obviously, using drugs at all. But again, or I shouldn't say again, I haven't even said anything about this. But it also depends on what you classify as a drug. Myself, I don't really have a problem with weed. I don't have a problem if you want to use like mushrooms occasionally, or something natural. Not all of it would be for me or anything like that. Some things might not be for you guys, but that doesn't, just because you don't want to do something doesn't mean you have to be diehard against something either. And up until what was it? I think it was like the 1920s. There was a guy, Henry Anslinger. And I've heard this name quite a few times. I did papers when I was going to college on drugs and stuff like that, especially in my philosophy class. But Henry Anslinger is the reason why there's the war on drugs. He was the one that started the whole war on drugs. And he was a horrible person. I don't want to really go too deep into him, but up until he started doing what he was doing, all these drugs were legal. In the United States, we actually had heroin clinics. We had ways of treating people differently. And I'm just going to say that the Swedes, because I think it was Sweden. It could have been Switzerland, though. I always mix those two up. Sweden, Switzerland, SW, I don't know. But what they did when they opened their facilities is not only did they give people a place where they could do the drug properly, or I shouldn't say properly, but safely, They also offer them help, whether it was therapy, help finding jobs, anything they could to make these people's lives better. And almost instantly, street crimes went down, deaths went down, whether it was overdose or murders. It had a very positive effect on the country as a whole. Portugal has also legalized all drugs, and they've seen the same thing happen there. Here in America, if you have a drug problem, you're either forced into rehab or you get arrested by the police and you're put in jail, which then in turn means that when you get out of jail, now you're going to have a harder time finding a job because now you're a convicted felon, and it just makes everybody's lives more difficult. So what this guy Johann was talking about was the problem isn't getting rid of the drugs. The problem is getting rid of the problems of the people doing the drugs. Because if these people don't have these deep underlying issues, then they're not going to be turning to the drugs like they are now. They're not going to become as addicted. He was talking about how, yes, there is that chemical addiction, but the mental addiction to things is far more dangerous than any physical addiction can be. And what I mean by this is look at cigarettes. I think it was the 80s when they came out with the nicotine patch. Well, Johann was saying how the nicotine patch came out and 17% of people who smoked quit. Well, that's great, but there's still the 83%. So you're giving people the nicotine so there's no chemical addiction, yet people still smoked. Well, why is that? You got to look deeper into things, and when you do, you realize that most of these people have some kind of dark pain inside of them, whether it's physical, emotional, problems that happened in the past, or problems that are happening currently. It doesn't matter. There's all, or I shouldn't say there's always, because you get the typical rich kid who gets into drugs or alcohol or whatever, and but generally people who have a true addiction, whatever it is, gambling, there's all kinds of addictions out there. But the underlying issue generally is some kind of personal deep issue. And until we really start addressing those things and we start taking mental health really seriously, that's going to keep happening. And I was kind of on the fence about the whole, just legalize things, give people a safe place to do it. I lean towards yes, but a little background on me. I've had several friends, family, people close to me who have died from drugs. So when you hear that, you instinctually want to blame the drug, or you want to blame the person doing the drug for getting addicted in the first place. But when you really think back to, at least in my situations, when I think back to those people who I did lose to drugs, they all had really deep issues. And I never saw one of them get the proper help they needed. A lot of that has to do with the stigma around mental health. A lot of it has to do with just in America getting healthcare is it's so expensive, and even if you get government assistance healthcare, a lot of places don't take it. It becomes a real hassle trying to find a place that will take you. When you do find a place, you got to wait weeks and months sometimes to even get your first appointment because there's so many people. In Massachusetts, we call it Mass Health. Most states have their own healthcare system that they provide people who can't afford their own. But if you're gonna buy your own healthcare, I mean, you're for the cheapest, you're gonna be paying like $300-400 a month. It's ridiculous how expensive it is. So a lot of people aren't getting the help just because they can't afford to. A lot of people aren't getting the help because people look down on people with mental issues or drug issues or both. And we need to start really changing as people because the drugs have been around forever. opium was started in China. I don't even remember when it was. I'm trying to remember back to like high school days where I was reading history books. But I mean, opium was in China forever. Um, Marijuana has been used, I think they traced it back over 8,000 years. I keep hearing a noise in the tent, and I'm trying to figure out, oh, there's a little beetle. Okay. Um, but, marijuana's been around forever. They found buried with Shakespeare, and I've never actually looked to see if this was true or not, but I've heard a lot of people say this, that he was actually buried with pipes that tested positive for meth, marijuana. Um, you know, Aristotle took a bunch of hallucinogens, and he was one of the smartest people ever. There are ways of doing drugs without completely ruining your body. And again, I'm not condoning going out and doing drugs just because of how dangerous they are, and especially with the drugs on the streets. Fentanyl is a huge, huge epidemic right now. People think that it's the heroin or it's the cocaine that are killing people. It's not. It's the fentanyl that is cut into the drugs. And what fentanyl is they actually give it to you as an anesthetic. Whether you're getting into an ambulance after like breaking a hip or a leg or something, they might give it to you to numb the pain. Or in my case, the time I had it was when I had my shoulder surgery a year ago. Before they actually gave me the anesthesia, they actually gave me fentanyl. And let me tell you, it's strong within seconds. Just seconds. Now, granted, this was IV, but a lot of people using heroin, they inject it as well. So it's doing the same thing. And within seconds, I was completely out of it. And this was under a controlled, environment. I was having surgery. But you put that into other drugs, well, now you're having the effects of those drugs plus the fentanyl. And on top of that, these people don't know how much fentanyl is in it. They might get one batch that doesn't have any and another that's 50%. Well, they do the same amount, but the fentanyl's stronger, so that's where the issue comes in. So street drugs especially are really, really dangerous. That's why I highly, highly, highly caution anyone getting into drugs, especially when you get into the harder drugs like that. Um, a lot of places are making marijuana legal. If you guys, are of age and you want to do it, great. Go for it. Um, if you guys want to drink, go for that. And guys, remember too, alcohol is a drug. They separate it because when Henry Anslinger was going on about this war on drugs, it was right after alcohol prohibition ended in the United States. There was a period where alcohol was actually illegal. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of Al Capone. That's where he made a lot of his money, was during the Prohibition era. He would have, speakeasies, which were basically underground bars. They had a bunch of moonshine, which is homemade alcohol. And that's basically what Al Capone did. And that's the thing. When you make these drugs illegal, you give the people on the streets more power. You know, look what happened in Mexico when, we made them crack down on all their drug laws. The drug lords took over and they own the country. Things have gotten better in Mexico, over the last few years, but there's still a huge problem with the cartel. And it's happened in so many other places, even in the United States. You know, you take weed off the streets, and in the places where it's become illegal or it's become legal now, you're not seeing as many street crimes. You're not seeing as many kids get into it, and that's another thing that Johann talked about in the podcast. He said that he was talking to a cop who, I think he said it was like the 80s or 90s or something. The cop was trying to bust a weed dealer, and he was in plain clothes, undercover. He was watching this dealer, and a kid came up to him and asked him to buy alcohol. He told the kid to scram, so the kid just went over to the guy selling weed, and now he's buying weed instead of alcohol. So when you put things on the streets, there's not that buffer like there is with a liquor store or with a marijuana dispensary, where you have to have a legal form of identification saying that you are of this age. They have, I know when I go to buy alcohol now, I don't drink all that much, but when I do, I'll go to a liquor store, and even though they know that I'm of age, their systems, they actually have to scan the back of my license. I wish I had my license on me so I could show you, but there's a barcode right on the back of the license, and they actually have to take that and physically scan it into the computer. That way you can't use a fake ID or anything like that. So when you take things off the streets and you control them, you know what's in the drugs, you know what's going to happen when people use the drugs. And obviously there's going to be people who react differently. I've known some people who can drink and they're totally fine. And one of my best friends, he has a beer and he's basically falling down drunk. So everybody's different when it comes to alcohol and drugs. And, you know, you just kind of have to realize that it's going to happen no matter what. At least if you control it, you don't give people on the streets no option. They're going to do it no matter what. And the thing that happened in Sweden or Switzerland, wherever it was, these people they started this in 2000. I think it was 2000 or 2001, something like that. And when Johann went there, I think it was like 2015 or something, he said that there were only 3 people who were actually on the initial program when it started that were still on it. Everybody else got clean. They've never had one overdose in their facilities. The amount of overdoses dropped like 80%. They did this in Vancouver too. Vancouver has this now. And same thing in Vancouver. They've seen tremendous success with it. So what my question is why do so many countries still fight it when it's been proven by these other countries that legalizing it and giving people proper help instead of just throwing them in jail and letting them sit in a cage. Johann talked about an experiment that was done. I don't know when it was, in like the 70s, 80s, whatever. Again, link in the description if you actually want to hear the real story. This is just third person spewing this out, but there was an experiment done where they took rats and they put them in cages. And what they did was they gave them one bottle that had heroin, one that didn't. Well, all the rats went to the heroin, they overdosed, and they died. Everybody thought that meant that there was a chemical addiction, and that's why they always went for the drugs. Well, another person later on decided to make another system where there were other rats in there. They had toys to play with. They had this, they had that, they had cheese. Everything that they could possibly want was there. And every one of the rats, they tried the heroin, but they didn't go back to it. And if it can happen in something as simple as a rat, it can happen in something as complex as a person. Because the way our brains work isn't really that differently than a rat. We're self-aware, we can think, we can process a lot more than they can, but chemically and fundamentally, the brains aren't that much different. So, this is more talk about drugs, but I'm going to end it by just saying if you guys do have any serious mental illness, or if you guys even just feel slightly depressed, you feel something's off, don't be afraid to tell somebody. Don't be afraid to, go to a doctor or tell your parents or tell a friend. If you guys need to, you can always talk to me. I'm not always responsive, but eventually I will get back to you. Um, you can always hit me up on Discord, whatever. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit because that's really what this talk is about. It's not about drugs. It's really about mental health and dealing with mental health in a proper way. And just to end this note, I do want to say that I have dealt with a lot of mental illness in my life. I'm clinically depressed. I'll be depressed for the rest of my life. It's a chemical imbalance in my brain. There's nothing I can do about it. I do know that there are things that I can do to help, and there are things that I can do that hurt. And you guys are going to have to figure that out on your own, because a lot of people have some sort of mental health issue. And when I say that, it doesn't mean, you're suicidal or anything like that. Just slight depression, or a slight chemical imbalance, or just going through a rough time, whatever it may be. That's when people do stupid things. And just know that it's 2019 now. You don't have to be afraid to say something about it. So I'm going to leave off with that. Hope you guys enjoyed. Leave suggestions for other things that you would like me to talk about. They don't necessarily have to be serious. It can be anything that you guys want. So just let me know. I'm going to leave that link in the description. Also, quickly, I do want to say too, with this series, once a week, I'm also going to live stream. And those live streams, they'll probably be like an hour long or so. And those will be a Q&A where we can sit and have these kind of discussions, but I'll actually be reading what you guys are saying. You guys can ask me further questions on topics. And the way that that's going to be formatted is, obviously for the first week, it's just going to be like hangout session or whatever. But after that, what I'll do is I'll have you guys leave what you want me to talk about on the next one in the comment section of that Q&A, and I'll do those first. That way, if you guys can't make a Q&A, but you want to know my opinions on something, then you guys will know where to find it. It'll be right at the beginning of the Q&A. I'll probably do, all the ones I get off stream first, and then move on to the ones in the stream themselves, because that might spark conversation as well. So let me know what you guys think about the series. They might not all be this long. I kind of went on a little bit of a rant, but um, I want you guys to learn more about me. So hopefully you did, and hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys next time.